So what have we learned from our expert therapist, apologist, minister, and biblical scholar? First, there's no scientific evidence that anyone is born gay. Second, homosexual confusion is often the result of brokenness in the soul, whether moral, developmental, or both. Third, surface happiness that is sometimes seen among homosexuals masks the deep levels of brokenness that are made clear in clinical and medical statistics showing high levels of promiscuity, infidelity, substance abuse, depression, suicide, domestic violence, and fatal diseases that are directly related to the gay lifestyle. Fourth, not only does simple anatomy witness to the Creator's singular design for sexual behavior, He has also left an unimpeachable written witness to that design in the pages of the Bible. In it, God teaches that sexual unions are to be conducted solely within the covenant of lifelong heterosexual monogamous marriage. Every departure from that model is uniformly condemned. Fifth, because of our inability to perfectly keep His moral law, God came to earth in Jesus Christ to pay the penalty that we deserve for our sin. Anyone who repents of their sin and follows Him can have this pardon, as well as the gift of the Holy Spirit, who provides the power to live in obedience to God's moral principles. So, God breaks the penalty of sin and the power of sin, and if the person is willing, heals the broken places that make them vulnerable to such behaviors. As the broken places are healed in an intimate relationship with God, sinful tendencies of every kind progressively lose their power and their allure. Yes, change is possible. A witness declared not only 2,000 years ago in Scripture, but today as well by countless thousands who at one time practiced homosexuality, but do so no more. So let's hear from them. Watch carefully as Dr. Julie Hamilton first guides us through some of the more common causes of homosexual confusion in males.
The research has revealed that people are not simply born homosexual. We also know that it's not a choice. People don't choose their attractions.
I experienced it more as a form of detachment from my father and an aversion to him, which was concurrent with a strong attachment to my mother.
One of the things that plays a role for some people who end up with a homosexual orientation is a boy's sense of his own masculinity or a girl's sense of her own femininity.
I was really attracted to masculinity because it was something that I felt so much deficit inside of me. And there was a longing to try to connect with something that I viewed as strong and healthy masculinity.
I really wanted to be those men. I was hungry for their masculinity.
He soaks in femininity at a time when he's craving masculine input.
I had a lot of feminine with my mother and my sister, and that brought a lot of insecurity about who I was as a little boy.
If he feels rejected or perceives rejection, he will still want the relationship, but he will give up trying. They call it defensive detachment. It's where he says, well, if you don't want me, then I don't want you.
I remember as he was hitting me, thinking to myself, you're not my dad. You don't love me. And I'm not your son, and I don't love you.
We can only handle so much rejection, and so he puts up a wall to the dad and what the dad represents, which is masculinity, but deep down inside, he's still craving the dad's love.
And so in order for his pain against me not to hurt as much, I had to pretend that he wasn't really my father. It was really somebody else doing this. And so I separated my identity from my own father.
Then when he goes on to school, around the age of 5 or so, he will often have a hard time connecting with other boys. Either he's just more comfortable with girls because that's what he's known and that's what he's familiar with, and he lacks confidence with the boys, or if he has acquired any feminine mannerisms, he may be rejected by the other boys.
I was teased tremendously in school by my peers. I was rejected. I was made fun of.
I was called sissy. I was called a girl sometimes, and I was excluded from playing with other boys.
They're saying that I'm, a faggot. They're saying that I'm gay. They're saying that I'm a sissy boy. So rather than trying to fight them and say that I'm not, why don't I just be?
When I was, I guess maybe somewhere around 14 or 15, he said, "Frank, you are homosexual." I said, "Pastor, I don't know what that means." But he told me that God had made me gay, that this was a special blessing from God to be homosexual.
I was very feminine, hung out with the girls, didn't play with the boys. As things went on, I was branded a homosexual before I knew what it was.
When I was 16, he picked out a man in the church to be my lover.
Around 5th or 6th grade, we started experimenting with each other, if you will. It satisfied something and it set something else in motion, which was actually pretty shameful. All of a sudden, I'm in school and people that I knew were accusing me of being a homosexual. Well, I was horrified. I had never thought of myself as that.
I see one key figure in our life, and it was this lady who looked like Marilyn Monroe. She was very voluptuous, very beautiful, blonde hair. When she would come over to our house, she would tease me about girlfriends. And because she looked like Marilyn Monroe, because she was so voluptuous, being humiliated by that kind of a figure began to instill in me a fear that a sexually mature woman would humiliate me.
I was safer around women, and I liked to be around girls, and all of my friends were girls. I didn't have anyone helping me navigate this world of being male.
He's watching the boys and he's wanting to be accepted by them and wanting to bond with them and have friendships with them, but usually unable to. And so he goes through those very important years, soaking in more femininity.
There were a lot of strong women in my life and very few men. It seemed women were the ones that made the decisions, got things done, told the men how to spend the money. So I didn't see much advantage in being male. Also, since I was the highly emotional, artistic, aesthetic kid, I didn't fit in very well with what was expected of the little boys.
And so by the time he reaches puberty, he's not going to be romantically attracted to girls. He already knows about girls. What's mysterious to him and unique to him are boys. And so that longing for male love, that emotional need that went unmet, now becomes a sexualized need.
When puberty kicked in, all of these desires that I had, wanting an in-depth and very intense relationship with the little boys, actually became sexualized.
Many teenagers that grapple with this secretly have a great deal of hopelessness. They believe that they were born this way, there's nothing they can do about it, and they're often hesitant to talk about it. The truth is that they weren't born that way, and that change is possible.
I grew up without a father until I was about 4, and I didn't trust men.
Between 1.5 and 4 is usually a time called the gender identity phase. They begin to very slowly and subtly separate from that oneness and that attachment to the mother and begin to look to the father to attach themselves to him. The dad, by spending time with his son, by verbally affirming his son, little by little, the dad imparts to the son a sense of masculinity and a sense of what it means to be a boy.
My father just wasn't there, so I basically just felt alone. With an increasing sense of feeling inferior.
I never heard from my father, "I love you, you're my son, you're good." I don't remember him ever hugging me, although I'm sure he must have.
There are many boys that grow up in single mother homes and they don't end up homosexual. So it's a father or a father figure, someone that he can look to, that he can bond with and feel a sense of connection with.
My perception was that my father wasn't there enough for me, that he didn't care for me, that he didn't love me.
Perceptions are everything. It's not so much what happens to us, but how we perceive what happens to us that matters. And so I know a lot of wonderful, loving parents that loved their children, but somehow their child did not necessarily perceive that love.
My parents divorced when I was 7. I was already feeling a great distance from my father. And a feeling that he greatly valued my older brother, who was interested in so many things that I was not.
Usually they're more sensitive and usually very smart and very perceptive, even somewhat analytical, where they are paying very close attention to everything that's happening and taking it all in, and even sometimes taking in more than, they're reading between the lines and they're taking in even more than is intended.
I, on the other hand, was very sensitive, and I grew up feeling completely unloved.
I was the emotional, sensitive young man, artistic and very intuitive. And my dad was the Navy boxer. I disconnected from him.
Either they're just perceiving that there isn't a dad, or they're perceiving that the dad is not safe or not welcoming. And again, it could just be their perceptions. I've known fathers that love their children, but maybe they got loud when they were angry. They didn't mean harm by it, but maybe just they became loud. To a sensitive 2-year-old boy, a loud, yelling man can be very scary. And so it's easier to stay attached to the mom than to leave the comfort of that attachment and attach to the dad if the dad appears scary or unwelcoming or unsafe.
The world of men was kind of scary and unknown and not too secure. I didn't have much information. My father was pretty quiet.
My same-sex attraction was actually an attempt to pull away from mother because there had not been that fatherly presence to draw me into his embrace where I could identify with him.
Other ways that rejection can be conveyed unknowingly is sometimes if fathers want to help their son become, a man, and they say things like, you're not tough enough, or, you're a sissy, or you're a mama's boy, things like that can make a sensitive boy retreat and not want to connect with the dad, and also not feel like he has what it takes.
At around the age of 4, I got scared in my bed and I ran into their room and asked him if I could sleep with him and my mom, and he got angry at that point and said, get out of here, you little sissy, and go back to bed. It was kind of one of those things that kind of began the rejection of my dad as a kind of scary person.
Before we can be attracted to the opposite sex, we first need to understand and be completely comfortable in our own gender and be comfortable with who we are. And so little boys need plenty of time bonding with other boys before they can become attracted to girls.
So much of identification with the same sex occurs in the context of play and bonding with other little boys in a troop bonding it's called.
So he looks to the boys to give him a sense of who he is as a male. He wonders, am I going to fit in with them? Are they going to accept me? Will I be a part of their group?
And I had an extra step in coming into troop bonding, which actually didn't happen for me until I was in the gay lifestyle.
I began staring at the successful males in the school, just looking at them, trying to figure out what makes them so successful? Why are they so popular? And I tried to emulate the way they dressed, the way they combed their hair, the way they walked, the way they talked. And that search quickly became envious because sooner or later when you're starting to do that, you realize, well, that tall, athletic quarterback, I'll never be like him.
I started noticing at that age, 13, 14, 15, my attraction towards other guys. I didn't connect it in a sexual manner.
So this search that you began innocently to try to figure out how to be like somebody, well, eventually turns into envy in many cases because they have something you will never have. And that eventually turns into idolatry.
When a boy would show interest, it would start out pretty natural at the very beginning, but eventually it would turn into something a little bit obsessive.
I thought that I was gay, but I never said anything to anyone because I was so afraid.
It's very easy for you to mistake that pull that you're feeling towards other guys to try to complete yourself as a sexual thing. And you start saying to yourself, oh no, I must be gay.
Female development is a little bit more complex. There are a number of pathways that can lead into lesbianism. One pathway is similar to what I just explained with male development, where a girl is bonding with her dad and not her mom, and she's bonding with boys, so she's soaking in male input into her life, but craving female input and craving the connection with the feminine.
My mom says my first full sentence was, I wish I was a boy. I remember being in kindergarten and praying every night that God would turn me into a boy. And I remember jumping up the next morning and running to the bathroom to see if he had.
My father was a construction person, so I was always out with him with hammers and nails and always playing with the guys and basketball things. I never really did any real girly things.
My mother was a professional. She was a chemist, and she worked long hours. I didn't have an emotional relationship with her, touching my hair or kissing me or telling me I love you.
For others, the girl may have been separated from the mom early on, even as a baby. Maybe the mom was depressed and unable to connect, maybe postpartum or some type of depression where she was unable to bond with the baby, or maybe the mother or the baby were hospitalized and they were separated. And even though she goes on and has a relationship with her mother or other girls, that break in the attachment leaves a void. And so lesbianism becomes a search for that motherly love.
Those 2 months that I spent in an incubator, my parents were not allowed to pick me up, to touch me or anything during those 2 months that I struggled to breathe. I remember zeroing in on anything that talked about abandonment, anything that talked about rejection, anything that talked about leaving you.
I believe that it was that first level of rejection of losing my mom, as well as my father giving me away, that opened up the door for me to have feelings that I felt different and felt strange, that I didn't feel like in all of the other kids my age.
My dad had his own issues. He was dealing with sexual addiction issues and brought some things into the house that I shouldn't have seen. But more importantly, it was the way he looked at women, both my mom and others, as sexual objects. And any time a sign of being a girl came up, I would push it down and push it away, and created quite a boy self.
For some girls, they're looking for an identity and they may have some factors that would contribute, or they may say that they're bisexual as an experimentation, and yet experimenting can lead to cultivating appetites that can lead to a lifelong pathway.
Going into my freshman year of high school, I made a friend with another girl who was in band. We did enter into a sexual relationship when I was 15.
I remember kissing this young lady, and it was like when I had kissed her, it was just like a poison, if you will. I would say it was a demonic spirit that was just released into my body, and it planted that seed, and then it started, just, wanting more and more. And then I started, thinking about women more and more.
There's one other factor for women, and that is something called emotional dependency, where they may have some hurts from men. Maybe they've been hurt or they've been let down, and they may also have some other voids that they're trying to fill. And so they get into a friendship with another woman, and that friendship becomes unhealthy. They become emotionally dependent, where they look to that other person to meet every one of their needs.
I didn't expect to be a lesbian. I didn't sort of say, okay, now we're gonna go be a lesbian. It was more like the feeling crept up on me, and I just couldn't get this woman out of my mind.
It's not as much about the sex as people would want to believe that it is. It's more about that emotional attachment.
I had this memory of putting my hand on her shoulder and thinking to myself, as I looked at my hand on her shoulder, I can see my soul leaving my body and going into her. And it feels so beautiful.
I remember a time when the police came to my apartment and they were asking her, and I was right in the bathroom, to turn me in. Where is she? We know that she's here. And so she was saying, I don't know where she is. And the police told her, you know what? I know that you all are lesbians, and the hardest thing it is for us to do is to break lesbians and make them turn on each other, because of that bond that lesbians do have, that they protect. It's like it's you against the world.
One of the challenges of not identifying with my mom way back when I was a child was that I couldn't really bond with her. I didn't really connect with her in a way that fed who I was. And moms do, same-sex parents help establish a sense of being, help establish a sense of who you are. And if I can't connect with my mother, then I lose that from the very beginning. And then later, as you hit puberty, it's the father's job to call you out as a woman and to say, this is what it is to be opposite, other from me, and to be a flower, and a beautiful flower, and treasured by men. Of course, I didn't get any of that. And so I was on the hunt for me. I was on the hunt for completion. So this lover that I had in high school, she personified much of what I thought was excellent in a person. And I was really wanting those attributes for myself. I was really looking for myself in her.
There was times that she would be thinking something and I would say it. Well, there's times that she would start saying things and I could finish it, because we had become so closely knit together. It wasn't of God, it was from the pits of hell, but it was still something that was actually a reality that I witnessed through our relationship, that we had became basically one.
knitted together by the devil, though.
There are other things that can lead a girl into lesbianism. Sexual abuse is certainly an issue for a lot of girls that can confuse them sexually. And sexual abuse can also affect boys. And for some boys that end up with a homosexual orientation, sexual abuse has played a role. Or early pornography exposure, there can be a number of sexual experiences that can confuse a child in their orientation.
I remember in 4th grade, I went to a birthday party. And at this birthday party, I was raped by several men.
My earliest childhood memories of the dysfunction of sexual brokenness came in as a result of the friend of a family molesting me as a little boy at 6 years of age.
At age 13, I think I just became a target towards an older boy in church, and he ended up sexually molesting me, and that went on for several years.
This man very kindly drew me into a place of trust, and he drew me into the mindset that what he was doing was somehow loving me. That brought in a lot of distortion into my mind and my thinking about who I was as a little boy.
When that boy feels this phenomenal sense of pleasure for the first time, it's like it implants in their brain this wonderful euphoric feeling. So they can think, oh, I must be a homosexual.
I hated the fact that he touched me, but there came a point to where I almost wanted him to do it. It was very, very conflicting to me.
Growing up, I was sexually abused. From there, I got into drugs and alcohol.
When I was sexually abused, I remember thinking, at least I'm getting some attention.
He spoke over me and said, the reason why this is happening to you is because you wanted this to happen. And what's so traumatic for an abused person is those words sink into them.
I was molested as a young boy from somebody else in my family. And that happened for years and years and years and years.
My sexual abuse started when I was 5 years old, 5 or 6. And I never really said anything about it. And then it started happening with peers that were older than me, and I didn't know what to do. I thought it was normal.
They think it's natural, but that does not define any person when there is inappropriate touch.
I thought that I was the reason why this was happening.
As you can imagine, that certainly made me very confused about who I was.
When I was 4 years old, I was sexually molested by a teen.
It started from thoughts like, maybe this is okay. If this is okay, let's try it out. And then I started to like trying it out.
I somehow felt responsible for what had happened. It had involved this older boy having had pornography.
Pornography was actually the doorknob on the handle when the door was opened. Everyone was curious and they're looking at these pictures, and then how about we try these pictures out? We don't have the female gender, but we have the male gender.
I was only 8 years old, but the scoutmaster said that he would take extra care to make sure that none of the boys gave me any problems, and of course that meant spending time in his tent.
Some of my earliest memories are of being involved sexually with other young boys. When I was in kindergarten and 1st and 2nd grade.
I began to realize that he was pulling me in, and how great that felt. How that felt like what I thought my dad should be doing.
One of the lessons that I learned was that if you get close to a guy, it's going to turn sexual, and I didn't want that to happen.
Things progressed fairly rapidly into a very violent situation on a camp out. But actually, what happened afterwards was worse.
I would pray over and over again for forgiveness. I felt a lot of intense guilt and shame about those experiences.
When we went back home, I told my brother. And my brother, who loved his scoutmaster and was embarrassed by his little brother, just hauled off and hit me as hard as he could, a pain that I've never forgotten, and said, "Don't you ever say that again." I told my mother, and she said, "It's not nice to make things up about people." And so I went into a period of silence.
The two women
particularly that I went to high school with, were involved with each other, but one of them also flirted with me, which of course messed me up a lot.
When I was 10 years old, older Girl Scout, we started to play, and it became a sexual relationship.
She would hold my hand underneath the seats, the movie seats, and things like that. You know, just that terrible mixed message. I started to question who I was.
I got into film at a young age. I was one of the original SpaghettiOs kids, and my parents actually got a divorce when I was a young man. I was 2 years old.
I felt the tenderness. I felt the touch of another woman, which was almost more than I could handle. It certainly awakened the desires that shouldn't have been awakened.
My dad was out of the picture and stuff. My mom, you know, she saw different men and stuff, and you know, we saw her engaged in relationships with other men.
Around the age of 16, I had started a job at the local mall and had to run in to use the restroom real quick, and a guy attempted to touch me. I just freaked out and ran out of there, but I got home and the seed had been planted that why would he do that to me? There is something different about me. Why would he think he could even do that?
She would let people take care of us, and you know, some of the people that would take care of us, you know, molested me.
By 15, I knew that what had happened wasn't right, that was called abuse, that having relationship with a person of the same sex wasn't God's plan.
Shortly thereafter, I went in again, and unfortunately there was someone else there that day as well, and that time I allowed him to do some sexual activity with me, and then before I knew it, that was almost a weekly occurrence.
I felt very vulnerable, and I felt afraid. I saw being a girl as being dangerous, and overnight I turned into a serious tomboy.
I was in 7th grade when I was molested, had never had anything lower than a B in school. And the very next year for 8th grade, I was an F student.
That was the basis of my fairly healthy world being cracked in half and a new girl emerging who was very, very broken.
It was the molestation that altered the course of my life. It basically killed who I really was.
I first started noticing about 8. Just really longing to be noticed by my male peers, longing for their attention, wanting to be chosen. After some childhood sex play with some playmates, that emotional desire became eroticized.
There was an incident on the playground once where I was chasing a friend, but when I caught him this particular moment, this instant, I felt something towards him as I held him. And it sort of scared me. It sort of made me feel good.
I was only 9 years old. I was spending the night at a friend's house. And he encouraged me to do some things with him that I probably knew better than to do. It robbed me of my innocence. It stirred and awakened curiosity in me that never went away.
But about the age of 13, I remember feeling very attracted to my same sex, and I couldn't control my feelings. And I had this lust that was burning in me, and unfortunately started believing that I was born gay.
The step off into homosexuality happened for me at the age of 17 when I was spending the night at a friend's house, and this sexual encounter just kind of happened. It was like, oh, this is what I'm lacking.
My own family, you know, verbally abused me and stuff, and so I was just looking for any kind of affection.
I just wanted to ease the pain and kind of escape reality for a little bit, and in that process I'm still giving myself away emotionally and sexually to men and women, trying to find someone that would love me, trying to find someone that would affirm me.
My interest in the pornography began to turn towards the men in the pictures, and I didn't know what to do with it.
At the age of about 10, I found some pornography. I kind of look at it as the perfect storm. I had some rejection from my dad. I had some difficulty separating from my mom, And then here came all the pornography.
I wanted to be those guys in the picture. I wanted to be with those guys. I wanted to be sexual with them.
I began to look at those images and think, man, I'm never going to look like that. I'm falling short somehow.
By the age of 14, I started seeking counseling, and they encouraged me to embrace the homosexual lifestyle.
I went to this Christian counselor and told him the whole story, and he said, pray over this verse and it should go away.
I figured if I prayed hard enough and did the right things, this would go away.
I thought there was no hope out of this life, and I thought, well, I might as well just embrace it.
I did, to a point, feel, I guess, rejected by God, because I felt like I had gone to him to heal me and say, Lord, I don't want this anymore, but there was nothing. I opened my eyes, and I would still see men everywhere that just attracted me.
I didn't want to be gay. I didn't want that.
Although some in the lesbian community, primarily those who have been hurt by men, openly declare that they have chosen to be gay, most homosexuals do not choose to have same-sex attraction. As we've just heard, such attractions come about as the result of a complex interplay between experience, developmental environment, and a person's unique personality, temperament, and perceptions of reality. But when sexual experience and its reinforcing pleasure is added to the mix, things can get far more complicated. Add to that the moral consequences found in Romans chapter 1 that come into play when a young person reaches the age of accountability, and it's easy to understand how things can get much worse before they get better.